Welcome to the Dirtbag State of Mind podcast from the Climbing Zine. I am Luke Mihal, and this is episode 3 of season 8, a conversation with Carly Rager. I first met Carly at the Climbers Festival in Lander, Wyoming a couple years ago, and Carly wrote a haiku on our typewriter. We always bring a typewriter to our events and have various writing contests. Shortly after that, Carly sent me some poetry for the zine. Things didn't really come together to publish something until this most recent zine, volume 26. And Carly has a feature article called Permission Slip. This one is really cool because it's kind of the first time one article in the zine is really connected with another. So in volume 24, Zach Clanton wrote this piece, Guerreras, about this big wall he developed on La Gloria, just outside of El Salto in Cienega de Gonzales. That's one of my favorite all-time stories in the zine in volume 24. So you haven't read that, maybe pick that up before you listen to this, and definitely read Carly's piece in volume 26 as well. But at the end of the article, Guerreras had yet to be freed, and Zach basically offered it up to the community, to someone who would want to do it. And Carly ended up taking on the challenge with her friend Mango. Mango lives up in El Salto. They had their own journey on the climb and managed a free ascent. And that's what her article is about in the zine. And we talk about that quite a bit here in this interview. What a joy to be able to talk to Carly. What a joy to connect one story in the zine to another. And Zach's efforts and generosity, I think, were very much appreciated by Carly and Mango as they found their own way up the mountain. You can get a copy of volume 26 at shop.climbingzine.com. I think we're a little bit different than most podcasts because the best way to support our podcast is to pick something up in print or pick up some of our shirts and stickers, our Dirtbag State of Mind shirts and stickers in our online store at shop.climbingzine.com. This episode is sponsored by Patagonia. Patagonia is proud to announce the Free Wall Kit, 6 pieces to help you rest hard and climb harder on the most sustained multi-pitch objectives. Designed to meet the demands of their ambassadors' evolving tactics for cutting-edge multi-pitch objectives, the Free Wall Kit prioritizes protection and recovery so you can focus on performance. Each piece is built with features to make the most of marginal rest so you can get back just enough energy for the send. Check out the full kit at patagonia.com or in our show notes. This episode is also sponsored by Kilter. Looking for a fun way to train or at home or at the gym? Check out the Kilter board. Kilter board has innovative light-up holds, a progressive app, and animated functions with climbs for all abilities and multiple layouts to choose from with large online communities for each. If you've been listening to our podcast for a while, you know Kilter has been a long-term sponsor, and now you can get a discount on a Kilter board by being a listener. There are flat rate savings. Larger the size, the larger the discount, ranging from $500 to $800 off. Use code ZINE at checkout, and this applies to North American customers only for the full ride, mainline, and auxiliary kits. For more information, check out settercloset.com and look in our show notes. Before we start our interview with Carly, we have Carly's poem that is included right before her piece in volume 26, and it goes by the same name as the piece, and it's called Permission Slip.
We lay next to her, infantilized by moon shadows cast, swaddled tight in the present, future, and past. Her wisdom sews folds of time not held in line. Her patience shelters youth, and her silence holds truth. We squirm to sleep, unsure and exposed. Our big eyes tilt up to meet our teacher. Like little bugs, we'll scale up each feature. Remaining vestiges of deep time dimmed, warped incarnations show us what lies within. And with our short time together, maybe, we'll earn the balance of the old and the bold. To see the wise, but be the daring. And with mariachi horns below us blaring, we finally granted ourselves permission to weave our own story into tradition.
All right, without further ado, let's get into this conversation with Carly Rager. I'm here with Carly Rager. I'm actually in Colorado, and you are where? You're in the Czech Republic, is that right?
No, I'm actually in Turkey right now. Yeah. So what had happened is that I went from Colombia to the Czech Republic. My mom's side of the family is Czech, so I have family there. So I spent some time with family just a little ways south of Prague and had kind of a break on this big climbing trip. And now I'm in Turkey in Antalya climbing again here.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I told you that I was going to tell you what a class bag was because
what is a class bag?
Yeah, so I mentioned this is just audio. I don't do video just to keep things simple, But a class bag, my friend Lisa Slagle coined this term, and it was years ago in the Zine we did a 50 types of dirt bags, and this was like kind of before remote work, nice. And so I'm sure there's I want to do it actually again. Maybe you can help me contribute to this, But a class bag is when you look good from the top up, and then the bottom down, you're in your dirtbag attire, So it's like when you have to, go to a meeting or something, and you look really nice from the top up, but you might be a little smelly and a little dirty from the top down. So yeah.
No, that's very good. That's very good. I've used the term diet dirtbagging before, like honestly to make fun of myself a little bit. Because I live in a van sometimes, and sometimes I am very much a dirtbag, and then sometimes I'm not, and I go kind of in and out of that several times throughout the year. So I will sometimes be like, oh yeah, I'm diet dirtbagging right now, meaning I guess that I do have a place that I call home, but I go on long stints like I'm doing right now of being pretty dirtbaggy.
I love that. So we met at the International Climbers Festival. I think it was 2024. Does that sound right?
A lot of the Lander ICFs blur together just since I've been going and teaching at them for so many years in a row, but I think 23 or 24, I think. I
remember it because you wrote a haiku for us, and you signed it, and I was like, is this really this girl's name? Carly Rager? That's such a cool name. Yeah. Nope,
that is on my birth certificate, for sure. It made a fun nickname in college. I don't think anybody knew my first name, but I do try to go a little bit by my first name these days, Carly. But yeah, Rager is my last name on my birth certificate.
I love that. And I'm so excited for our conversation today, just because there's so many overlaps of interest I think that we have, and we've worked together for about the last year on your piece. I think the first conversation we had was about a year ago, and it's just so many overlaps with writing, with even down to like haikus and poetry, which is almost like this subset of writing that I find really interesting. And then Mexico and training, and so I'm really excited to dive into this conversation with you and kind of geek out. I often say this is like the only climbing podcast out there where people geek out about writing. So I'd love to geek out about writing, but I'd love to start and just hear where your climbing journey began, and where you started climbing and where you got the bug and fell in love with it.
It's funny, I guess sometimes I don't know where to exactly start this point, but because I guess you could start it from, the first time I put on a harness, which had been in 2008. In the Black Hills. So I'm originally from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And so the Black Hills or Custer State Park or Spearfish Canyon would be the climbing areas that people are familiar with. But we went to the Black Hills all the time just on camping trips. And I was kind of like your classic tomboy. I don't know if we say tomboy anymore, but I was always in the dirt and climbing all over and just kind of outside throughout all of my childhood in the Black Hills in South Dakota. So in 2008, I got to try climbing for the first time. So I guess technically that would have been the first time that I ever climbed. But my parents hated it, and there wasn't money for the gear or anything. So while that was the first time I went climbing and absolutely loved it, I don't think I really would say started climbing consistently until I moved out to Colorado and was going to Colorado State University for school. And that's close to the Poudre Canyon. And so that's when I slowly started really consistently climbing, as much as I could during school. So that would have been 2012 or 13, something like that. So the Poudre Canyon outside of Fort Collins is really where I had a lot of my formative climbing experiences super early on and got super psyched on climbing. Not really that much of a varying story, I think, from what a lot of people experience. But it really was a cool outlet for me because I was in school for engineering at the time to get in my body and out of my brain, which if anybody has gone through really intense either undergraduate or graduate programs, so I did both at CSU for engineering. A lot of pressure in that. And I think having this place where I could get into my body with my brain, I guess that sounds funny, get into my body, but like bring my brain along for the problem solving of everything.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying.
Super immersive. Yeah. I think the best way I could describe it is, like it's intense, it's immersive, there's like problem solving, but I'm outside with friends, and just kind of all of those things for me was like a very full experience that I maybe wasn't getting modeling bridges and doing like earthquake engineering research in a lab. So that's kind of how I started climbing and got more and more into it. It slowly became a very central pillar of my life, obviously. Even when I was working as an engineer, I was climbing a lot and coaching at a local gym. Very, very much my outlet. But it's been interesting since quitting engineering in 2020. When I was young, I always wrote all the time. And my grandmother was a poet, and I always wrote. And that was like a big part of my life. Engineering beat the shit out of me in terms of like the creative side of me. But since I've been, 5.5 years now, not being an engineer, it's been interesting to watch. It's almost like my brain has like reclaimed its natural state in terms of creative writing, which tends to just kind of come out of me all the time. So I don't know, now I'm in this totally different life, and climbing is a main theme of it, and how I'm like exploring the world and all of these things. But yeah, that's kind of my path, I guess. So yeah, I own Project Direct Coaching. That's really my, what I do. I would say I'm like very much a professional coach. But it's been really cool to bring in aspects of writing into that realm. Yeah, as a way to express some of these cooler experiences that we have that mean a lot to us, or at least mean a lot to me.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, there's a lot there you just expressed, like kind of the left brain, right brain. A lot of creative people tend to be just creative, but it sounds like you got a little bit of both. Backing up to South Dakota, I think that's so interesting because I feel like that's such a kind of known place on the climbing circuit, but I've never been there. I know I've heard about that couple, Jan and Herb, that did all the first ascents in the Needles, and then I've heard that Spearfish has good limestone climbing. How do you describe the climbing in South Dakota and what it's like there and the history and everything?
Good question. So I feel like South Dakota climbing, for the most part, exists in the Black Hills, which is this kind of like sliver of hills in a very flat state. And there's Custer State Park and kind of the southern part, which is granite, and there's very cool bouldering and like old school trad climbing in this zone. And then there's Spearfish, which is like limestone sport climbing, more modern development. I think there's probably much more than I'm not like the expert on this, but those are these two areas. So more granite down south, and then Spearfish Canyon being limestone up north, and they are both very, very cool in their own rights, and nobody thinks of going to South Dakota to climb, really. So the environment is much more like there's like families on vacation. It's super chill, which I really like about it. I would maybe compare Spearfish Canyon just like a little bit to Ten Sleep, except it's way harder to on-site there because there's not chalk everywhere like there is in Ten Sleep. But think more like, pockety, crimps edges. I guess there's some roofy action in Spearfish too, depending where you go, but it's a sweet place to climb. Like I really quite enjoy climbing in Spearfish Canyon. But yeah, that's kind of South Dakota climbing, and it's all within a very small area because most of the state is very flat. But the Black Hills are, I have this special like nostalgic attachment to the Black Hills because that's where I went as a kid on family vacations and ran around all these rocks before I knew what a harness was. You know what I mean? So I kind of have this like, I don't know. To me, the Black Hills are very, very, very special for a lot of reasons. And it was just cool to add kind of climbing to the list of that reasons that already existed. And there's cool climbing there for sure. I think it's a special spot. Yeah,
it sounds like a really, really special place. And it seems
you
like
should go.
I know. I really want to go. Maybe this will be the summer. I feel like there's so many places like that in the United States. There's just so much. And especially being Western centric, you kind of get caught up in just going to the places in the West, but then there's so many other places in the U.S. that have interesting climbing and history and everything like that. Yeah. talking about writing, I've loved working with you over the last year, and it makes sense now that you kind of have this left brain, right brain, because you had sent me a poem in the past, and I was like, oh, I really like her poetry. That first poem you sent me, I don't think it made it into a zine, but it made that impression. And anyone who's listening that has tried to get in the zine, it's very hard to get in the zine. You know, I probably publish, roughly about 2% of what I get submitted, but I really like how you're able to express concrete ideas within your writing, and then also you have this poetic side of your writing personality as well, which is really cool. How did writing and expressing yourself in that way begin in your life?
Well, so I started writing poetry. So writing prose is a new side of my writing. I think for me, writing will naturally come out as a poem. Wrote my first poem when I was like 5 because my grandmother was a poet.
Yeah, that's so cute.
I think it was like couplets about snow or something, like something about like a snowy tree in South Dakota. And I think I was very, very young. My grandma would let me stay up late, because there's no rules at grandma's house. And it was like this fun thing that we did. And so she introduced it to me super young. And it's been this thing that kind of like, I'll leave it for a few years and come back to it. But it's kind of been woven through my life for now. Yeah. So I guess like 30 years. I've always felt like poetry is the most fun because you're kind of trying to condense the feeling that you want to evoke with like maybe less words, but each word becomes more important when you're doing that. And so it can kind of create this really fun process with wordplay, but then you're also like cutting through the faff. I don't know. You're cutting the fat a little bit sometimes, and to write something that gets to the point. And I think that's really cool about poetry. And so like in the piece in the zine called Permission Slip, I wrote the poem first. That's what naturally I wrote. After we did the first free ascent, then I kind of went back and I was like, okay, I also want to like kind of tell the story, right? But it was almost like I had to write the poem to get to my own personal feeling state around it. From there, so I got like down into like how I felt about it, and like the final line, we finally granted ourselves permission to weave our story into tradition, was like, boom, that's like how I felt about it, or like how I could really condense what I was feeling. And then from that, almost like the story had a clear foundation that could tell the story, and then I could kind of keep weaving that theme in throughout the story as I went. But my process was like, write a poem, get to the feeling state, and now you can weave that into the prose piece, which, I mean, you helped me a ton with that as well. So like, but that was kind of my initial process.
That's so interesting. Such an interesting process. And I can kind of relate to that too, because for me, poetry is the most flowy, natural state of writing. It just kind of flows out of you. I feel like with prose or writing a book or writing an essay, it's like hard work. It's like building a house. And then sometimes you just throw away all your work. It's
really hard.
It's so freaking hard. And then poetry is always flowing. Well, that's such an interesting process that you have. It makes a lot of sense now thinking back, because now we have this final story that it's literally at the printer right now. I think I just got a message from the printer, and the cover like got messed up. So the whole zine was printed and they're putting the cover on, and my printer has such an attention to detail. He's like, the cover didn't quite go on, so we got to like expand the spine a little bit. But so yeah, now we're in this final state of your piece, and maybe for the listener, we should just kind of back up and give some context and talk about El Salto. Maybe we can just go back to the beginning of how you started climbing in El Salto and how you met Mango, your partner for this climb, and we can just kind of geek out about Guerreras and El Salto and Mexico and this whole journey.
I went to El Salto for the first time. I'm like, was it 2020 or 2021? But basically I had started project art coaching. So for the first time in, really my adult life, I had the freedom to travel and work at the same time, which, I mean, given the time frame of 2020, 2021, there was such a huge macro change with COVID and remote work. My situation was like just a little different in that I had actually quit my engineering job, started a company. Whoa, I can be wherever I want to be for the first time. And it was winter and I was living in Montana. And I was like, wow, Mexico sounds cool. And then I had heard that, there's tufas down there. So that's something I just had never climbed before. Being from the northern part of the U.S., like, that's the wrong latitude for tufas. So I ended up going down with a good friend of mine, Gavin, and we were going to go down for 2 weeks. But for the first time, I had the ability to stay longer, so I think I stayed for 6.
Classic
6
Mexico.
Classic, not crazy different, I think, than a lot of people's stories maybe regarding El Salto or Mexico in general. But actually, that was funny. The very first year, I stayed in Mango's house. She was renting it out. She was in Peñoles bouldering during that time. So we actually only met like towards the end of the trip. At that time in my life, I was going through a lot of changes. 1, 2, the community in El Salto and the people in El Salto, it was like, I mean, I'm a bit of a dirtbag, and like, I just loved it. It was just kind of, how do I describe it? Like, it was kind of off the beaten path in that way, but there's a small enough group of people there that we really all got to know each other, and the climbing was sick, but like, there's so many other memories that I have that have nothing to do with climbing from that first trip and everything to do with the people that I was spending time with. So I think that's like why it really like put a pin in my heart in a longer term sense. And then that was, I don't know how many, 5 years ago or something, so I kept going back and kept climbing more, and then getting to know Mango and getting to know the people there. And then in 2022, I'm sorry, sometimes I'm like, I know it's 2021 or 2022, but the exact years get a little fuzzy.
Totally.
But I remember one of the years I met Zach, and he was like such a character. He was like handlebar mustache and this big hat, and he was like at rock camp where a lot of us were hanging out a lot at that time, but then he'd disappear for like a week at a time, and I was like, where's this guy going, and then he was like, kind of started talking to him, and he's like, oh, like, I'm up on this bigger mountain called La Gloria. So if you're totally unfamiliar with El Salto, it's primarily hard single pitch steep sport climbing. Now there's much more multi-pitch being developed, which is awesome. Shaman Loco and a lot of locals are doing a lot of development in the multi-pitch realm now. But Zach was really first people to be like, yeah, so it's this terrible, heinous approach up to this crazy mountain, and there's nothing up there except for like a rattlesnake, and I'm gonna bolt this 14 pitch route. And I was like, oh shit.
And at this time, was he going up there solo? Because he did some solo in some things with partners, right?
Yeah. I think he was doing a mix at that time, and maybe you might have to ask him specifically. But there was definitely him going on some solo missions up there, and I think also Tony and Dave were assisting him too. So basically it was just kind of this like mythical thing that I never really gave much thought to, that this like cool dude was doing, and I was like, oh, that sounds sick, maybe someday I'd go up and climb one of those routes, just all chatting and hanging out at camp. And I really didn't think about it too much other than that sounded awesome. And then I think I left that year in maybe the end of February. And then in March that year, that's when that huge fire came through, and they were up there on La Gloria and running down for their lives. And I won't tell Zach's story because he wrote a very, very powerful piece about it that's in the zine as well.
Yeah, in volume 24. Yeah.
And I was back in the States at that time, but I remember kind of hearing about that go down and talking to Mango and Ramon about it, friends down there, and it's just holy shit. And
yeah, and they literally...
thankfully, they were okay.
It's so crazy, too, because they literally finished the first ascent, pulled their ropes, and then they're like, there is a fire coming towards us, and then they had to outrun the fire, which is just...
crazy.
He wrote that story so well, and his photography, and that's still to this day one of my favorite stories that Zach wrote. Yeah.
And so there's a 14 pitch route called Rosando up there that they had bolted and then sent. And then there is the Guerreras, which is right next to it, right to the right of it. So there's kind of these two routes up there. And I can tell you now, doing that approach more times than I want to really recall in my brain, running down that approach away from a fire would have been just short of an Olympic feat. the amount of adrenaline that they, I'm sure, had in their bodies at that time. But like, this is not like a jogging trail. The idea that there's a trail at any point is actually a little bit delusionally optimistic. I would call this sort of like... So to run down away from a fire would have been absolutely, absolutely bonkers. This happened, and then I was in El Salto again the next year, as it goes, as I was, and they went up and retrieved all of their stuff, you know, off the mountain, because they had just left everything and ran. And I remember Zach showing me all these melted, burned gree-grees and just, like, crazy shit, like ascenders that were just, like, you know, looked like Salvador Dali had his way with these ascenders, and they just melted. It was crazy. And that second route had not been freed at that time, and I was still kind of like, oh, dude, that sounds cool. You know, Zach was kind of showing me some photos, and I was like, this doesn't really have anything to do with me, like, psyched that they were doing it, you know, but I was like, oh, I hope you guys go up and get that send on that thing. And kind of this, like, story that was evolving in the background that I never really gave too much thought to, I guess, until Zach kind of decided that he was ready to move away from trying to free Guerreras and open it up to anybody that wanted to do it, and wrote that piece in the Zine, which was super cool. And even then, I was like, there's so many hard, strong, rad climbers in El Salto. I was like, this shit's gonna get freed like next week. Still never thinking about that Mango and I would do it, I guess.
And I loved how he concluded his essay in volume 24 by saying, I've had my journey on this, and now I'm opening it up to whatever party that would like to do it. And eventually it became you and Mango. Did it start with Mango kind of proposing the idea?
I think I read the piece in the Zine, you know, and I maybe hadn't talked to Zach for a little bit, and I was like, oh, like, I messaged him, I was like, yo, that piece is sweet, like, I remember some of those days, you know, like, I'm sure somebody's already up there has sent it, right? You know, I think I texted him. I was like, somebody surely went up and crushed this thing, I feel, just because there's hard climbing in El Salto. Like, the locals in El Salto are crushers. So I just never really imagined that it would sit for as long as it did without the first free ascent. No, dude, nobody's done it. Like, you know, he's like, I don't even think anybody's tried. And I was like, interesting. And at that point, too, I had done a lot of, like, single pitch project in El Salto, and maybe I was just kind of craving, like, a different experience, like, a different flavor to that experience, and in this place I love. And then I was like, I wonder if Mango would want to do this with me, you know? Like, I'm going to just see, you know, see if she might want to do it. Do you want to do something a little different this year? Switch it up a little bit. So I proposed it to her. Of course, like, my timelines are maybe a little fuzzy now because it's been a little bit of time, but I proposed it to her, and she was like, yeah, it sounds like a cool adventure. And I was like, sick. This is going to be something.
And something you do really, really well in this piece is highlight your strengths and your vulnerabilities. And I think that's a key word that continually comes up with a really good zine essay, because I think in a lot of climbing writing, especially in the past, it doesn't address the full spectrum of emotions. It's like man conquers the mountain, and it glorifies the ego of the person. Totally. You highlighted a lot of, you know, vulnerabilities of your inner dialogue of two women kind of going up on a big wall and not being you and another guy or something like that. Can you talk a little bit about how you decided to tell that story and what that inner dialogue was like for you? So
just like a little bit of background. I mean, for the most part, more of the bigger multi-pitch days that I've done, like the Rainbow Wall in Vegas, getting into like more than 10 pitches, I've largely done, with the exception of one or two, that I've largely done with a male climbing partner. And not that there's anything like wrong with that at all, but even if I'm like contributing very equally to the decision making and the climbing, it kind of seemed like in most of those cases, like the male climbing partner maybe just had like a little bit more experience than me. And so while we're swinging leads and making these decisions together, I still felt like maybe it wasn't like fully equal in terms of like responsibility in that partnership. And then just also like doing bigger climbs with women, something I'd done before, but I haven't done it in the sense of like a first free ascent, right? And so there was a lot of newness that I felt. And I felt a lot of like confidence about doing it with Mango, which I think was like really the like anchoring point for me, and like hope for her too, in that like we're very like open about our communication about like, hey, if I'm doing something and you just like really don't think that's what we should be doing, like let's talk about that. And having those kind of like, we're equals in this, we're equal partners in this, was like a really cool thing to do. But I'm trying to think of a lot of women-led first free ascents, and there's like a couple that come to mind of women that I like super look up to, but not as many. And that I think has been like reflected back to me in conversations and subtleties that I've received from like being like, you know, we're going to go up and do this. And despite having all the experience, I think we're sometimes greeted with a little bit more doubt. And then in the piece, I discussed this too. It's hard to like over the years not let, when you kind of say you want to do something and most people's reactions, or maybe most male reactions, is this a little bit of doubt, or like a little bit like, do you really know what you're doing? Or like the verbiage surrounding like, oh, that's a big boy climb. It's hard to sometimes parse out how much of that is like legitimate, should we consider it, and how much of that is just like conditioning and we just like don't even need to listen to that. And Guerreras and doing the first free ascent on Guerreras, I think really brought to the surface anything that we had picked up over the years, and it really gave us a chance to kind of pick through it and be like, oh, actually that's, you know, that's some bullshit that we don't need to deal with. Or like, hey, let's maybe do Rosando first, make sure, you know, Mango and I hadn't done like as big of a climb as like Rosando together in the past, and so let's like link pitches, let's like ace Rosando and feel really good about that. And we can like let our own experiences together inform the level of confidence that we have in each other, as opposed to all the other sticky stuff that we've collected over the years.
Obviously, it's articulated very well in writing. I think any writer will say you can articulate yourself the best in writing versus using your words, you know, verbally. But you really described that really well. And it sounds like you really got to know the mountain well, and you almost gave the mountain like a female persona or female identity as you were writing your piece.
Yeah, I did.
I guess it is called La Gloria.
Maybe to some extent. La Gloria,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
La Gloria. And then I think he had named it Guerreras, which is like female warriors.
Oh, wow.
So we didn't name it that. I don't know if it was like really a conscious thing, or if there was something about La Gloria for me that felt like, well, I mean, obviously the mountain is old, so that's like, it literally has been sitting there for a long time, but it kind of felt like, because it exposed all of these things that we got to work through together, right? There's like this sense of old wisdom, I guess to me felt very feminine. I don't know if Mango feels the same way, but yeah, I guess that kind of came out in the way that I personified the mountain and talked about it as a she in my piece. I don't think that was like specifically intentional. It just kind of came out that way. Sure.
It's so cool. I want to go out and see it. I keep saying I'm going to get to El Salto. I'm actually hoping to go there in a few weeks.
Oh, please go do it. And then please, yes.
Well, I probably won't climb it because I'm like a single pitch guy these days. I've kind of retired from multi-pitch climbing. But I feel like vicariously, that's how I climb big walls now is vicariously. But even this approach to get up there is just a journey, right? You were literally naming the sections of the approach, and I'm guessing it's quite different now that the fire has rolled through. Can you even just describe getting to the mountain now?
I think the approach was affected a little bit less than I initially thought. It was really more like the top section of the approach. Kind of felt like the fire had affected it the most. But yeah, the approach is like 1.3 miles, which is like not very far, but it's something like 2,700 feet of elevation gain. So it's not, yeah.
Not your typical El Salto approach.
Yeah, the 2,700 feet of elevation gain is one thing, but doing it in 1.3 miles is like, there was a lot of just like scrambling on the approach, I guess, for parts of it. The first pitch of the approach was like, this is forest, a lot of like cat's claw and everything's like sticking to you. So I was just like, I think probably swearing more than
the cactuses that come out and bite you.
Dude, seriously, yeah. Like my like sun hoodie was just ripped shreds. It was funny. And in some of the photos, you can see kind of this like relief, almost like foothill ridge that you follow, and that goes on. We called it the Ridge of Never-Ending False Summits because you're always like, yeah, we're for sure almost there, but you just kind of follow that forever. And it's quite steep. And I think the other element of the approach that adds a lot to it is there's no water source up at the base of the mountain. We had to carry like all of our stuff for sleeping up there and climbing, obviously, but just big amounts of water and like haul bags and like stashing. And some of the locals in El Salto actually came up with us one time to just help us get some more water up there. That's like a big challenge of doing any climbing up there, is the lack of water source. So I think too, my own personal like trudge in my brain and in my memory of this approach is just like having so much water on my back in this huge haul bag and just being like, just like, motherfuckers, like, what are we doing? Like, just kind of doing that approach. And then you get to the slabs, and then that's kind of like where you really are now scrambling with your haul pack. Yeah, there were some moves I was pulling with a haul bag on my back, and I was just like, I mean, I'm like, we're not really hiking anymore. Like, maybe we put in a hand line here. And then the top part, kind of where there's actually some like fire damage on the approach, where a lot of the ground was just kind of like you'd be walking on the ground and it would kind of be like crumbling underneath. And so it hadn't been stepped on, but then it would kind of crumble underneath you, and you're just kind of like crawling around in it for some amount of time until we figured out really the best way to kind of get to the base of the climb. So the approach, I think, in terms of this climb is probably why it sat there for so long, realistically, without being sent. Because there's not really a trail. It's pretty heinous. There's no water source up there. Like, it's very unlikely that you're just going to wake up one morning early, not know this approach, not know anything about how that's going to work. And you're not going to just like hike up there and do one of these climbs. It's going to be a multi-day experience. You are high up there. It feels like pretty alpine. There's just like, a bigger entrance fee to get to the climbing. And then also we don't even know, how much of the climb is going to be affected by the fire. So there's just so many unknowns to go on that amount of like hiking and toil I think that's maybe why it sat for so long. It just took a couple crazy people apparently to be like, you know what we should do instead of going single pitch climbing? we should like do something like more, I guess, we'll call it more adventurous. I think that's the way that we can call it.
Well, and I love how y'all are making this effort, like reading Zach's essay and then getting what I got out of your essay, and now talking to you and learning more. It seems like this torch was really passed from Zach and Tony and Dave. And Dave was, I think his last name was Henkel, but he was one of Zach's partners that passed away as well. He installed like a memorial plaque for him, and there's pictures of Dave in volume 24 of the zine. So I know how much this climb meant to Zach, and then now I'm seeing, how much it meant to you too. So that's just such a cool thing to kind of uncover, that this thing that happens in the climbing world in a very meaningful way. And to kind of paraphrase, it maybe becomes more meaningful than just hiking 10 minutes to a sport climb. And you wrote some beautiful words about laying at the base of it and having a bivvy. And so I'm guessing you have a whole day for the approach and then you bivvy before you guys ended up doing it.
If you went up and you had like a good cache up there and you had a bunch of water and all of your cooking stuff and all of your sleeping stuff and all of your climbing stuff in this kind of shape, if you had that up there, you could go up and do this in one very, very long day. You could do it. But I would say, honestly, the better experience would be to go up and hike in the afternoon, get to sit and watch the valley at night, perched up on the rocks at the base of the climb, like get to see the light change through the valley and on the climb and under the stars. And to not have that would really distracted from the whole experience for me, So like, I feel like alpine climbers, they like to go fast and light, and they like maybe start early and they go and they're moving really fast and they get off the mountain early and they get back to their cars and they got their FKTs and their other acronyms. But I think I would recommend that you go and elongate the experience up on La Gloria a little bit. It's so much work to get up there and it's a beautiful valley. And yeah, I think like Mango and I got to have the experience that we got to have because of, all of the hard work that Zach did. I mean, it was a very different meaning and probably deep to us in a way that's so different than what's deep to Zach. And if somebody is going up there again, I'm sure they would have their own experience that could be meaningful to them. But I guess I would encourage carving out the space to allow that to happen.
I love that. And I totally agree with my previous big wall experiences, to just get to know the mountain and feel like a oneness with it. And when you guys are starting the climbing, it's quite difficult, but you don't really know the grade. There's no chalk. It just sounds like a complete adventure.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, so Good At Us is 13 pitches, had not been freed. The crux pitches are pitch 11 and 12. Get up there and potentially find out that they're way harder than we think. Nobody's sent them. Zach kind of gave us a very big range of 12B to 13B, but that's a range and you don't really know. And we also don't know if it's been affected by the fire. And so on send day, you pull up to pitch 11 and you're like, this could be a 12C or a 13B that we have to project, which has pretty big implications when you're that high up on the mountain, in terms of are you gonna go down, or let's say we had to project it, are you gonna go down between, are we gonna stay up here and do the true ground up, not go down? There's a lot of logistical questions that then come to play that we didn't have the answer to, not knowing the grade of the climb at all. That, I think, moment held a lot for us. There's a lot of unknowns as we left the belay of pitch 11 is this could be just so many different things. It could have so many different implications, and we've been thinking about it for 3 months. So those moments held a lot for both Mango and I to go on. And the meaningful part about that for Mango and I is that we both on-sighted both of those pitches. So both those crux pitches we both on-sighted, and that was so far away from what we even considered a possibility. We were kind of floored and obviously smiling from ear to ear, whoa, that was crazy. And I think too, you've probably had this experience with multi-pitching and big walling, when you and your partner could get in this zone together. And I feel all the pitches leading up to starting pitch 11, Mango and I were getting in that zone together. And, we've been up there a lot and spending so much time together that we were we had so many ridiculous inside jokes that were happening between the crux pitches. We had given each other radio nicknames of Popcorn and Chip. It was just we were totally up on this thing together. And we got to the base of the crux pitches, and Mango's let's send this shit fucking now. And I just we were very in the zone and focused in those moments. I think that was a space that we created together that held that magic, or however you want to call it, that allowed us to both on-site both those pitches, which was just so not what we were expecting that day. And we were obviously we were pretty hyped.
The best case scenario happened, and as you're writing about it and reflecting on it, I'm guessing a lot of the kind of revelations of how cool it was kind of happened as you're reflecting about it later and you're able to write about it. I think writing's so cool, especially an article, because you're able to crystallize what you felt, and you did such a good job of telling the journey. So
I actually wrote that initial draft of that I sent you just 3 days after that, after we did Free the Route. Kind of floored me that we were so nervous and we were so, man, can we even do this? What if it's 8A? What if they're both 8A or 13B and we have to project them? How long are we going to be up there and in this for, And so I don't think either of us thought that there was even a possibility that we were going to on-site. And so it brought up a lot of questions for me that I wanted to work through, and that I did work through in the process of writing this piece, in terms of your own self-perception. Who's getting to form that? Who's getting to form your own self-perception about yourself is something that I think unraveled up there a little bit. in like a good way, but in a way that I wanted to process. And so I think writing is, for me, has always been that outlet. Just kind of wrote down everything that I thought and got to look at the difference of my self-perception versus the reality of that day, and then also get to appreciate the fact that I don't think that would have happened without a partner like Mango in that space that we created with each other. And I was just kind of like, whoa, like I actually do want to, I guess, crystallize this or get to move through it in a way that I get to look back on. So that was kind of what it was like in the writing process. And I kind of told you before, when I write a piece, if it's a story, I usually start with a poem to distill the main emotional like shades that I want to bring into the piece, or the main themes or kind of like literary elements that I want to bring into the piece. And so I did that with this, and then wrote the story. And then you helped me really a lot, honestly, kind of get it to where it is right now.
That's so cool, because maybe it's like projecting where you forget the whole journey and then you just see what the end result is. Because, we probably went back and forth 10, 15 times on drafts and just seeing little things to pull out of the story. But it's cool to hear that you wrote about it so quickly afterwards. And I think that's a very effective too to get the best memories. I feel like memories kind of ebb and flow and become rose-colored glasses after a while. But with this one, you had such a short period of time that went by before you kind of crystallized what you wanted to say. With the little bit of remaining time too, I'd love to, and I want to interview Mango as well. But Mango isn't just one of the best climbers in El Salto. She's also really dedicated to creating community, and I think she's very intentional about that. And can you tell us, just a little bit about Mango's role in the community? And you described her cafe, Hanuman Cafe.
Hanuman.
You described it as the living room of El Salto.
First of all, you should totally get to El Salto and see if Mango would sit down and chat with you for a little bit about El Salto, about what she has created there, because she will always have more insight than me, being a local Mexican climber. So I would highly encourage you to chat with her. But so Mango started Hanuman Cafe, and it was like not that different. I think we both started these businesses like within a year of each other. And this cafe is totally the place to go in El Salto. The living room of El Salto, the hub, like there's, amazing coffee and these things, but she really just also created the spot. And the amount of work that she undertook to make the cafe what it is today is like really hard to, I think, wrap your head around. I think some of the people that have been in El Salto since maybe 2019, 2020, and remember when there was nothing, and when I first started going there was like internet was sort of every other day experience.
Totally. Yep.
And now sometimes, but don't count on it. There wasn't like a place to get coffee, or there was like climbers camps, but there was like nothing like that comfortable for climbers to just go and hang out or read a book. They do movie nights. They do everything happens there. I think it's the biggest thing that I would say. And Mango created that. You go there and you just know, and you're just like, holy shit, this was a vision that somebody had, and they worked slowly for a long time, not just 6 months, but 4 years, 5 years to create what it is now. And it's incredibly impressive from the perspective of having that vision, but also from the perspective of having the perseverance and like work ethic to bring it to where it is right now. And obviously I guess it benefits El Salto for so much more than just like coffee and a place to hang out. It's what like glues that community together in a cool way. So I hope you get to go and get a cortado there, or whatever coffee it is that you like, and get to go drive up and see La Gloria as well.
Yeah, totally. I haven't been to El Salto since 2017, so a lot of these modern changes I haven't seen. And the first time I went to El Salto in 2006, we saw one other climbing party like the entire week we were there. So the place has just evolved and changed so much over the years. And it's cool to see just the whole Monterey scene too, and how many local climbers there are and how many gyms. And it's just it's a really vibrant community. All right, so I lied. I have one last question, because we didn't talk about this at all, but you guys also made a film out of this experience too, right?
We did, or we are coming close to the finish line of that part of this experience. So, so we made, or in the process of finishing, I guess, a film about this, which we're going to plan to premiere at No Man's Land Film Festival, which is doing an Asheville event, but also to bring it around to a handful of other events this year, kind of throughout the U.S. I typically go to a handful to teach, but we're also going to be showing this film. The film itself is getting close to being completed. However, the exact where we're showing it, that hasn't been fully written in stone yet. So we're kind of trying to get the film done before we do much in terms of planning. But yeah, so there's going to be a short film about this first reascent. So you can keep an eye on that or watch out for that coming up this year.
You chose the two most laborious, I guess three most laborious things. So a big wall with a huge approach is laborious. Print media is laborious. And then film might be even more laborious than print. So you've got the trifecta going.
Yeah. Okay, but to be fair, I am not a filmmaker. I've had nothing to, I did the climbing part.
Yeah.
Yeah, so...
And who are the filmmakers?
So Mario Stanley and Rob and Travis is the director of photography. They're kind of the main three that were heading up the filmmaking. It's a RAB supported project. So RAB is the main film sponsor. And so that they're I would say I'm, providing all of the information about the climb and the things. And we did the climb, but the film making itself, I take absolutely zero credit for it. But I am really excited to get to share with people what I hope people get from the film, or even just from reading the piece in the zine, is going into those unknowns. Going into the unknown is where you're going to get to have these conversations with yourself and your partner that are going to lead to so much more growth, whether or not you send or not, than if you just keep doing the thing you are already familiar with. And that can take a lot of different forms in terms of thinking about it from a climbing perspective or a traveling perspective. Let's say you don't ever want to do multi-pitch, it's fine. But let's say you could just stay at your local crag. You don't need to book a one-way ticket to Turkey by yourself, which is what I did a couple weeks ago. But by going into the unknown, whether it's because you're going and doing a solo travel trip, even if it's single pitch, or attempting a first free ascent with a good friend, is that's where all the good stuff happens. But it doesn't seem that way when you embark upon that, because there's so many unknowns and it's uncomfortable. And so I hope that if people read the piece or watch the film, maybe they get to feel oh, wow, I'm about to do something that I'm uncomfortable with. And they feel okay, that's the good part. That's actually the part that means I'm doing something worthwhile, or that I'm going to learn from, I guess.
Absolutely. That's such a great note to wrap up our conversation on. And you articulated that really well throughout the course of this conversation and in your piece. And definitely when you get back from Turkey, there will be a copy in your mailbox.
Yeah. I am psyched. I'm headed back in not too long. I don't know exactly when, but I'm excited to see it in the mailbox for sure. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for bringing this piece to light. And you definitely helped me get it to where it is right now. So I'm excited. Hope people enjoy it.
All right, that was my conversation with Carly Rager. If you enjoyed that and you haven't read Carly's piece in volume 26, please do. You can pick up a copy at shop.climbingzine.com. And hoping to do a zine thing in the future with Carly. She also has an accompanying film that I believe is going to be premiering at the No Man's Land Festival in Asheville, North Carolina. So keep your eyes open for that. That is this spring. And our good friend Kathy Carlo runs that event along with some others, and a really cool lineup of films always. Music for this episode is by Devin Dabney. Our digital editor and producer is Chad Rich. And signing off from Durango, Colorado, I'm Luke Mihal. Peace.